The first swing of my excavator's bucket cracked like a peal of thunder. New black asphalt split apart. Slabs of pavement tumbled over each other like shattered ice. The project manager standing on the other side of the property line just froze, mouth open. Because 31 days before that, a judge had already told them plainly what would happen if they kept refusing to clear off my land. Here's the strange part. None of it needed to go this far. If they just picked up a phone and treated me like a neighbor instead of an obstacle, that parking lot would probably still be standing right now. But some people get so wrapped up in blueprints and profit margins that they lose sight of a basic truth. A line on a survey map still belongs to somebody. I'm Ethan Walker, and for most of my adult life I owned 48 acres of commercial ground just outside a small town in western Kentucky, right off State Route 68, where the traffic kept getting heavier year after year. Back when I bought it in 2002, there wasn't much out there. Soybean fields, a rundown feed store, and a gas station where people recognized your truck before they recognized your face. Everyone thought I'd lost my mind buying commercial property in the middle of nowhere, since nothing was going up around it, but I wasn't after fast profit. I figured land could afford to be patient, and it turned out so could I. For most of those years, I leased the fields to an older farmer, Calvin Brooks. Calvin was more than a tenant. He was the kind of friend who'd wave from his tractor, drop sweet corn on my porch every summer, and always sensed when something was off. We'd sip coffee from beat-up thermoses watching the sun rise over those fields, talking about weather, grandkids, football. Anything but business, since neither of us had much patience for people who measured everything in dollar signs. Then things shifted. Around 2021, a developer called Riverstone Commercial Group picked up close to 70 acres right behind my land. Within weeks, survey teams were crawling all over it. Orange flags sprang up in fields that had grown corn for decades. Drones hovered overhead, and massive signs announced a retail village set to reshape the whole county. Restaurants, national chains, offices, entertainment. Every local paper acted like we were on the verge of becoming the next boomtown. A few days later, I got a call from a man named Derek Sloan. Smooth talker, expensive watch, boots so clean they'd clearly never touched mud before that day. He smiled through the whole conversation like he already knew the outcome. "Mr. Walker," he said, gripping my hand, "we'd love to buy your frontage. It'd improve access to the shopping center, and we'd make it well worth your while." I smiled back. "Appreciate it, but I'm not selling." That didn't faze him. "Maybe a long-term lease, then?" "Maybe," I told him honestly, "if the project actually gets built and we land on terms that make sense." He nodded, thanked me, climbed into a pickup worth more than my first house, and drove off. I watched the dust settle behind him and figured that was the end of it. Couldn't have been more wrong. Construction kicked off months later, and I won't lie, it was something to see. Bulldozers ran from sunup to sundown. Concrete trucks queued up by the dozen. Steel framework climbed skyward, and every week another stretch of farmland vanished under progress. I wasn't hoping they'd fail. Honestly, I wanted the project to succeed, since a thriving development next door usually meant my own land would climb in value. Then one Tuesday, right before breakfast, Calvin rang me up. No small talk. "Ethan, you need to get out here now." I asked what was wrong. He paused just long enough to knot up my stomach. "They're paving your land." I laughed it off, it sounded absurd. "What do you mean they're paving my land?" "I mean exactly that," he said. "Bring your paperwork." The 40-minute drive felt like 4 hours. Every awful scenario ran through my mind. Maybe they'd crossed a fence line. Maybe gravel got dumped somewhere it shouldn't have. Maybe a property marker got misread. I kept telling myself there had to be some reasonable answer, because nobody sinks millions into construction on land that isn't theirs. At least that's what I believed. Then I turned onto the highway entrance and saw it for myself. Fresh asphalt covered nearly the whole front corner of my property. The white parking lines hadn't even dried. Handicap spaces sat exactly where Calvin used to park his combine every harvest. New light poles stood anchored in concrete, and ornamental shrubs lined what someone had apparently decided was now the border of their shopping center. My property stakes were gone. My grass was gone. Almost 90 feet of my frontage had vanished under a finished parking lot. I pulled onto the shoulder and just sat there, hands locked on the wheel. I wasn't shouting. I wasn't angry, not yet. Honestly, I think I was too stunned to feel much of anything at all. Years of paying taxes on that ground, walking it, tending to it, worrying over it, and then in one afternoon somebody acts like it's theirs just because they poured asphalt on top of it. Calvin walked over, pulled off his cap, and said quietly, "I told the foreman yesterday they were crossing your line." He looked at me like I already knew that. That single sentence hit harder than the parking lot itself. It meant someone had been given a warning and chose to ignore it. I dug Derek's business card out of my glove box and dialed him right there, staring at my own land buried under new pavement. He picked up on the second ring, upbeat as ever. "Ethan, how's it going?" I looked through the windshield at rows of parking spots that had no business being there and said, as steady as I could manage, "Derek, we need to talk, and it's serious." "Ethan, I think you've got this wrong," he said with a thin, nervous laugh. The kind people use to stall while they figure out what to say next. I stared out at the fresh asphalt again before answering. "No, Derek, I know exactly what I'm looking at. Your company paved close to 90 feet of my land, put in light poles, striped parking spaces, and somehow wiped out every survey stake that used to mark the boundary. So tell me, what part am I getting wrong?" A long pause followed. Not an awkward one, a calculated one. Finally he said, "Let me make some calls. I'm sure it's just a surveying error." "You've got 2 hours," I told him and hung up. Calvin looked over and shook his head. "They're not going to fix this on their own." I wanted to argue with him. I wanted to believe no real developer would knowingly build on someone else's property and just shrug it off. But something in Derek's voice already told me an apology wasn't coming. 2 hours later, almost to the minute, my phone rang again. Derek sounded like a different person this time. The friendly salesman was gone, replaced by an executive who thought he held the upper hand. "We looked into everything," he started. "Seems like there might have been a small discrepancy between 2 surveys." "Small?" I cut in. "You built half a parking lot on my land." He kept going like he hadn't heard me. "Truth is, this parking layout actually works better. Traffic flows smoother, emergency access is easier, and honestly, it's a win for everyone." I nearly laughed, not from humor but disbelief. He wasn't apologizing, he was selling me. "Here's what we can offer," he went on. "A 5-year lease above market rate. Steady passive income for you, no need to rip out good asphalt, and everyone comes out ahead." I leaned against my truck, staring at those glossy black parking spaces. "Everyone except the man whose land you took without asking." He sighed. "Ethan, let's be reasonable." "Reasonable," I said, "would have been a phone call before you poured concrete." His tone hardened. "Tearing all this out would be extreme." "No," I answered evenly. "Building it without permission was extreme." Then I said the one line that would end up costing his company hundreds of thousands of dollars. "You've got 7 days to clear every inch of it off my land, or I'll clear it myself." He laughed like he thought I was bluffing. "You're not serious." "You'll find out," I said, and hung up before he could respond. That afternoon I drove straight to see Melissa Grant, a commercial real estate attorney I'd trusted for years. Melissa wasn't loud or showy. She had this even, measured way of talking that somehow made you realize you'd already lost the argument. She listened quietly as I spread survey maps across her table, then pulled up county GIS records, my original deed, easement filings, and the development plans Riverstone had filed for permitting. Nearly an hour later, she looked up over her glasses. "They're not just near the line," she said. "They're well past it." "How far past?" "About 88 feet at the deepest point." Even Melissa seemed caught off guard. "That's not a surveying slip anymore. That's encroachment." The next morning, she brought in an independent licensed surveyor, Harold. They labeled it an unintentional boundary overlap and offered me $20,000 to lease the occupied section for 5 years. Melissa slid the letter across her desk without a word. I read it twice before handing it back. "No, that's what I was hoping you'd say," she said. By the end of that same afternoon, she'd already filed for injunctive relief, trespass damages, restoration costs, and reimbursement for every professional fee we'd racked up. Roughly 3 weeks later, we were standing in county court. Riverstone showed up with 3 lawyers, 2 executives, and enough tailored suits to fill a whole row of seats. Derek smiled at me before the hearing began, like we were partners rather than opponents. "Still time to settle," he murmured. I smiled right back. "Still time to move my parking lot off my land." Melissa elbowed me before I could add anything else. Judge Helen Mercer had no patience for wasted time. She went through both surveys, questioned each surveyor separately, then turned straight to Riverstone's legal team. "Your own surveyor confirms these improvements sit beyond your client's recorded boundary." One of the attorneys cleared his throat. "Yes, Your Honor. But the encroachment was unintentional." The judge nodded once. "Intent doesn't determine ownership." The courtroom went quiet. Melissa then introduced aerial photos taken during construction, including shots showing the property markers still standing before the excavation started. Worse for Riverstone, Calvin took the stand and testified that he'd personally warned the site foreman before the asphalt went down. "I told him they were crossing onto Mr. Walker's land," Calvin said. "He told me the engineers already knew." The judge jotted notes without lifting her eyes. Riverstone's lawyers argued that removing the lot would delay the shopping center's opening, cause financial strain, and hurt local businesses waiting to move in. Judge Mercer folded her hands. "Your client chose to keep building after being notified by the neighboring landowner. The cost of that choice belongs to your client." 20 minutes later, she delivered her ruling. Riverstone Commercial Group had 30 days to remove every unauthorized improvement and restore my property to how it was before. If they didn't comply, I'd be authorized to remove the encroachment myself, track every expense, and recover full reimbursement. Derek looked blindsided. Outside the courthouse, he caught up with me in the parking lot. "Ethan, let's not make this personal." I stopped. "You paved my land. It was a mistake. The mistake happened once. Everything after that was a choice." Melissa opened my truck door and reminded me quietly that we were done talking. The following 30 days were oddly quiet. Riverstone did nothing at all. Not one parking space removed. Not a single light pole relocated. Construction rolled on as if the court order didn't exist. Their GR. Embarrass anyone. I just meant to exercise a right a judge had already confirmed was mine. Owen climbed down from the machine one last time and asked quietly, "You sure about this?" I looked out over the parking lot that never should have been there in the first place and smiled. "I've been sure for 31 days. He climbed back up, and the diesel engine roared louder. Then the bucket bit into the edge of that fresh asphalt with a crack that echoed across the whole shopping center. You could practically feel it through the soles of your boots. The first slab peeled up like a giant black rug, exposing the crushed stone underneath, and every worker nearby froze in place. Within minutes, phones were out everywhere. People filming from sidewalks, storefronts, even the beds of pickup trucks. Owen wasn't angry or careless about it. He worked with the same care he'd used pouring a church foundation, one section at a time, lifting asphalt, loading broken chunks into waiting dump trucks, pulling light pole bases, clearing landscaping, and grading the dirt back to its natural shape. Every bucket load, every hour, got logged. Partway through the morning, I heard shouting before I even saw who it was. Derek came storming out of his truck with the site superintendent right behind him, both red-faced as the stop signs at the entrance. "Stop!" Derek yelled. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Melissa calmly handed the deputy another copy of the court order before either of us could respond. Derek marched right up to me. "You're destroying company property." I pulled the judge's signed order from my folder and held it up so he couldn't pretend not to see it. "No, Derek, I'm removing your property from mine. There's a difference. This is going to cost us a fortune," he snapped. I couldn't help a small smile. "You had 30 days to prevent that." He turned to Melissa. "Tell him to stop." She crossed her arms. "My client is doing exactly what the court authorized." Derek opened his mouth again, then glanced toward the deputy, clearly hoping for backup. The deputy just shrugged. "Court order's valid. As long as he stays on his own property, there's nothing here for us to stop." For the first time since this whole thing started, Derek had nothing. No pitch, no negotiation, no smooth talk. He just stood there and watched every decision his company had ignored get undone one bucket at a time. By late afternoon, the last stretch of asphalt was gone. The ornamental shrubs were pulled, the light poles loaded onto trailers, the crushed stone hauled off, and fresh soil spread across the whole frontage. Anyone who hadn't seen the lot the day before would have assumed nothing had ever been built there. I stood next to Calvin as Owen powered down the machine. Calvin chuckled, elbowed me, and said, "Looks like your land again." I looked out over the open ground and said quietly, "Yeah, now it finally does." I really believed that was the end of it. I underestimated how hard it is for some companies to admit fault. About 3 weeks later, Riverstone filed another lawsuit, claiming I'd caused nearly $60,000 in damages by tearing out improvements they'd paid to build. Melissa laughed out loud reading the complaint. "They're suing you for obeying the judge's order." At the hearing, Judge Mercer barely let their attorney finish his opening before cutting in with one question. "Did my earlier order authorize Mr. Walker to remove the encroachment after 30 days? "Yes, Your Honor." "Did your client comply within that window?" "No, Your Honor." She closed the file. "Then I don't see any basis for this lawsuit." The case was tossed that same morning. Then came the part Derek probably never saw coming. The court ordered Riverstone to cover my legal fees, the full excavation bill, the independent survey costs, restoration expenses, and the extra filing fees, since their second lawsuit had no merit whatsoever. Walking out of the courthouse, Derek caught my eye across the hall but didn't say a thing this time. There was nothing left to say. A few months later, the shopping center opened, and it did well. People showed up every weekend. Kids ate ice cream on the sidewalks. Families filled the restaurants, and life carried on the way it usually does. My land stayed untouched. Eventually another business came to me the right way. Asked first, respected the boundaries, and we worked out a lease that worked for both of us. Funny how much smoother business gets when it starts with respect instead of entitlement. Looking back, I don't think the parking lot itself was ever really the point. Asphalt can be torn out. Light poles can be replaced. Money comes and goes. What actually got under my skin was the assumption that having more money, more lawyers, and a bigger project meant someone could just erase another person's ownership and expect them to accept it afterward. Maybe that happens more than we'd like to admit these days. Maybe not. But here's what I do know: property rights don't vanish just because concrete sets on top of them. And sometimes the priciest mistake isn't the one made with a bulldozer. It's the one made by assuming your size puts you above the rules everyone else has to follow.